Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax. A normal Wednesday evening, and me and my 4 other friends were just hanging out, talking, doing normal teenager things. Now my friend Keith was really into the supernatural, so he suggested we all go to his uncle's old ranch and explore the forest surrounding it, because he claimed it was haunted, but my friend Jess said it was ridiculous. And there is no such thing. She was a skeptic and logical person, so we all sided with her and called Keith crazy. But then he said that he could all go and see for ourselves the next night, so we all agreed. This would end up the worst decision of our lives. It was the next day and I woke up, stretched and took a shower and changed. Feeling my fresh on a nice summer morning, I went to the bus stop where me and my friends would meet up. I got there and saw Jess and Keith talking, so I went up to them and said good morning. But when I asked about our other 2 friends, Keith said they couldn't go since they would be busy for the day. I said that was fine. And so we waited for the bus. Keith told us that he had an experience at that ranch that made him get into the supernatural and urban legends. HC experience went like this. It was a nice day in September, and Keith's parents went out for their anniversary, so they let Keith go to his uncle's ranch to spend the week. Keith was around 10 to 12 years old, and he was excited. And once he got there, we instantly went to play with his uncle's dogs and looked around the ranch and seeing all the animals. He always had a childish and playful personality, and that's never changed. Then after 3 days of being there, Keith got a little too curious and snuck out in the middle of the night to wander the farm to see what it was like at night. But then in the distance he heard it, an odd sound that was disturbing, so Keith decided to check it out. And his uncle always warned him to never go to the forest alone, whether it was day or night. Keith was too curious and went anyways. There he wandered, but he knew his way around the forest because he went there several times with his uncle, and Keith brought one of his uncle's dogs with him. It was a German shepherd, and his name was Bernie, and this dog was tough and protected Keith at all times. So together they went into the forest. The entire time they were there, Keith felt as if he was being watched, and the dog was scared, which worried Keith, since Bernie wasn't scared, no matter the situation. Then Keith saw it on a tree. He saw blood and a dead rabbit mauled next to the tree. Then Keith wandered deeper, seeing more and more dead rabbits. Keith decided he had gone too far and decided to head back there. He saw something, a creature, a pale white creature with 2 bony pale legs and 2 arms that had razor-sharp claws and a big gaping mouth, covered in serrated teeth. Keith quickly ducked behind a bush, hoping the thing didn't see him. This creature had no eyes. It seemed as if they were sewn shut. But Keith knew that some animals relied on sounds to get around. But before he knew it, that creature was near him, and the dog was on guard yet silent. And Keith covered his mouth as well as the dog's mouth, and they kept quiet. Then he saw as the creature crept around the bush, and then a deer was nearby, and the creature immediately chased it. Then, after 5 minutes, all Keith could hear was a deer getting killed, and as it cried in pain before everything went quiet, all the birds flew away, and the second Keith's body could move again, he bolted out of the forest, and the dog followed. Then, Keith couldn't sleep after witnessing all of that. Now back to us sitting in a bus headed for the ranch. After about a few hours that seemed like days, we arrived in the afternoon. The sun was setting, and we went up to the ranch and Keith let us in, and there we met his uncle. And we all had gotten permission from our parents to stay for the next few days, and Keith's uncle was fine with it. So after getting our gear set up, we waited for midnight. And once Keith's uncle was fast asleep, we snuck out and went into the forest. It was just Keith, Jess, and me. We all agreed that if we went too deep, or if we encountered the creature, then we would head back immediately. Suddenly all the birds flew away, and it got very quiet. Too quiet. Not even a minute went by. We all were terrified, and we found an old barn in the middle of the forest. We all checked it out and regretted it. Inside, we found blood everywhere. Some of it was fresh, while some of it was old. There we saw what seemed to be dead bodies, each with their face completely mutilated, and their eyes were missing, with their jaws hanging wide open. We were all horrified and bolted out of there, making one crucial mistake. That was to make a sound. This entire time we were to stay in complete silence. There we saw it standing before us, that same creature, and we ran, but Keith tripped and all we could hear was his screaming, and then it stopped. After about what seemed like forever, me and Jess headed back to that barn to try and save Keith. We stumbled upon him in a corner, his face covered in his own blood, and we saw it all in his eyes, what he went through. So we got Hick out of there. But he mumbled about this creature, and, what it did to him over and over again. It wants to kill me. It wants to kill me, is all Keith was saying. So we were worried for him as we carried him and knew we had to come clean to his uncle and our parents about what we witnessed, and did. The second we came inside the house, we saw Keith's uncle sitting on the couch, clearly worried. And the second he saw Keith, he called the ambulance. And it's been a while since this happened, and all we can say is that no matter what, you should stay in silence when alone in a forest, or you'll be its next meal. The first thing they noticed was how dark it was, with not a star to be seen and the moon nowhere in sight. Two young men crept on to the abandoned property. The story was different every time it was told. Some said it was an old reservation, others said it had been a camping site, and still others claimed it was the property of an old recluse. Eric, the younger of the two, had boasted about having explored the property, and before he knew it, was on a mission to spend the night there to prove it. This is a bad idea. Eric. Zach was Eric's best friend, as well as his common sense, when Eric was willing to listen, that is. He'd come along to make sure nothing happened to his friend, but deep down he wanted nothing to do with this place. Known simply as the Glen, people of all ages stayed far away. Between the lack of light and the unnatural quiet, the Glen seemed sinister even during the day. At night, it was as another world, a land of shadows and mystery. Don't be a wuss. If you had more guts, you might actually have a girlfriend by now. Eric, thankful as he was for the company, hated being told what to do. Half of the reason Head come here was that everyone was forbidden from entering. No one, not even his best friend, would tell Eric Bailey what do. We just need to spend a night here, take a picture, and we're done. Think of it as a camping trip. With a crack of thunder, the clouds began to release their pent-up torrent. Neither of the boys could see more than a few feet in front of them, could hear anything other than the rain. The boys quickened their pace through the sloshing mud and pouring rain. The trees grew closer together here, enough only to stave off part of the rain, but slowed the two down as they struggled to get through the branches and underbrush. Zach's foot caught on a root and he plummeted into the muck. As he got up, he looked back, and it almost seemed as if there was a third set of footprints. Moving the mud out of his eyes, now he could only see those of himself and Eric. "Come on, Z." "I'm not waiting for you." The young man leapt to his feet and continued after Eric. The smell was terrible, even worse than the time Eric had chased after that skunk on a dare. This was the horrible, rancid smell of rotting meat. Eric, seemingly broken out of his apathy, walked over as well. Z, I told you to go before we left. Smells like something died." "Something did die, Repu," his friend replied. Out of the small hole, he'd pulled out a worn leather bag, attached to a severed, rotting hand. The hand, cut off, just bellows. The elbow was at least a week and a half old. Judging by the wound, it had been wrenched off. The young men put the hand back in the hole and covered it, giving it a proper burial, as Vac put it. He began looking through the bag, but the only thing of any note was a single weathered book. The wind howled outside as the youth read the journal Head found inside the leather bag. At first glance, it was as average and boring as any other journal. The owner of the journal seemed to be a flirt, and his latest chase was after a girl who's shown up in town one day, always just out of reach. He'd see her out of the corner of his eye. He'd heard she was going towards the Glen and decided to follow her there. Hey, I'm just gonna take a picture of this place. We can head home after the rain slows down and just say we were here all night. Zach, barely registering what his friend said, continued to read. Eric examined the cave and decided to take a picture of the back corner. Here it was ever so slightly illuminated by some strange, luminescent mushrooms. They had been the first indicator of the cave the boys had seen outside. Despite initial reluctance, they had decided strange mushrooms were preferable to the downpour outside. Taking the picture, he put the camera in the leather bag Zach insisted they keep. Zach continued to read the strange diary. Eric had been abnormally quiet for the last few minutes. Zach worried about his friend, put the journal in the bag. Eric was sitting in the corner talking to himself when he noticed Zach's approach. See? I told you it would be fine. Nothing out here to be afraid of. Zach examined his young friend, noting the strange place he had chosen to rest. Atop of the rock they were placed, surrounded by more of those odd mushrooms. Had they always been there? Let's go, Eric. Storm gonna let up tonight. Go? Go where? We were going to stay for the night, but I see no reason why we couldn't stay here longer. Zach took a step further, looking much harder at his friend. Despite sitting down, every muscle was tensed, as if waiting to pounce. His smile seemed strange, as if the face it were on was never meant to smile. But what held his gaze were the eyes, glowing with the same illumination's light as the surrounding fungi. A flash of lightning illuminated the inside of the small cave. A shadow cast across the floor. Zach turned to run, but the person who had been Eric lunged at him. He struggled against his former friend's grasp, throwing him against the wall. As he reached the entrance, he screamed in pain. His left eye, as if being torn out by the cold itself, lost all sight. Zach grabbed the leather bag and ran, blood streaming out of the now empty socket. He had no idea where he was or what had taken his eye. He'd been running for twice as long as they'd taken getting here, and still no break in the trees. An inhuman scream echoed, and was answered somewhere else nearby. No. They were hunting him. The sloshing of mud, the breaking of branches, at worst of all the unearthly screams, grew closer and closer. Everywhere he looked, the same slight illuminances followed, lighting the hunter's path to their prey. After an eternity of running, Zach reached the edge of the forest, the fence marking the border of the glen in the distance. The thing that wasn't Eric was right behind him, displaying pure rage as it gained ground. Zach kept over the fence tripe on the wooden board and fell flat on his face. After a few moments, he looked back toward the glen. All he could see were the ever-glowing eyes. A voice, not even remotely that of Eric, came from those eyes. You will return. They all come back eventually. Not Eric tore off, back toward the glen. Zach, beginning to stand, noticed the camera that had fallen out of his bag. The picture was of the cave. There stood what used to be Eric, his eye glowing. To his right was an older youth, one arm torn off. Behind both stood the girl he'd read of. Her entire body, as pale as the mushrooms, shared the same luminescent glow in those soulless eyes. Years had passed since then. The newscaster was talking about a recent disappearance. Beside the TV was a single photo. A boy with glowing eyes, a girl with pale skin, a youth missing an arm, and a man with one eye.